Hello, sleepy soul. The night is quiet, the world is asleep, and something is waiting in the dark. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and write your country and current time in the comments. Now listen carefully. Buying that older place felt like the best decision I had made in years. I wanted a project, something to keep my mind busy after my divorce. And the place had a kind of charm even beneath the dust and peeling paint. It was a single-story ranch home on the edge of town. The kind of property realtors describe as having solid bones. The kitchen, though, was a nightmare. Dark cabinets, yellow linoleum, and a faint smell of mildew, no matter how much I scrubbed. I spent most evenings after work tearing out the old fixtures myself, blasting a little classic rock through a Bluetooth speaker, and pretending I knew what I was doing. The strange part began on the fourth week of renovations. I had just removed the cabinet under the sink when I noticed that the wall behind it did not look quite right. The paneling sat slightly uneven compared to the rest, and when I knocked on it, it gave a dull, hollow sound. It was too small to hide anything major, maybe old wiring or a forgotten pipe access. But curiosity won. I fetched a screwdriver and pried it loose, expecting insulation or possibly a mouse nest. What I found instead was a narrow gap, hardly wide enough for me to squeeze my shoulders through, leading into darkness. The air inside that space was thick and stale, like a cellar that had been shut for decades. My flashlight beamed shock against rough wooden beams and dust dancing in the light. The crawl space stretched about 8 feet deep, tapering toward the foundation, and immediately, I spotted something strange near the far end. A small pile of objects stacked neatly against the wall. Old photographs were scattered across the floor, black and white prints curled at the edges, and a faded pink dress small enough to fit a 7-year-old lay draped over a wooden crate. The sight froze me in place. Whoever left those things there hadn't meant for them to be found. I crawled closer, brushing aside spiderwebs, and lifted one of the photos. It showed a group of children playing on a front lawn, their faces smudged with age, but still visible. One girl had a distinctive birthmark across her cheek, shaped like a crescent moon. There were several more photos, birthday parties, school portraits, family snapshots, but none looked recent. Beneath them sat a sealed metal box about the size of a shoe box, heavy and cold to the touch. The latch was rusted but intact. I hesitated for a moment, then pried it open with my screwdriver, expecting old letters or coins. Instead, I saw several disposable flip phones lined up like artifacts in a museum. Each phone was labeled with a strip of masking tape, handwritten numbers, and faded blue ink across the backs. The batteries had been removed, but one of the compartments still held a SIM card. My flashlight caught a reflection off something scratched into the metal lid. 3 letters and a date, so faint I could hardly make them out. It looked like initials, possibly someone's way of keeping track. My first thought was that it belonged to the previous owner, some paranoid collector or amateur investigator. But the more I stared, the more uneasy I felt. Why hide burner phones behind a wall? I brought the box into the kitchen, wiped my hands on my jeans, and sat on the dusty floor just staring at it. Curiosity beat common sense. I turned one of the phones over in my hand, wondering if I could get it to power on. Most of the devices looked identical, the same cheap silver model popular in the early 2000s. The serial numbers were still legible, though, etched into the plastic beneath the battery slots. Out of habit, I snapped a photo with my own phone, mostly because I wanted to figure out the brand later, possibly post about it on a repair forum. Later that night, I searched a few of the serial numbers online. It was just idle curiosity at first, but one of the results stopped me cold. The exact same sequence appeared in a scanned PDF of a local newspaper article, an old piece about an unsolved child abduction case from the same county. The article mentioned that authorities had found a disposable phone near the scene. Its serial number partially linked to several others believed to be connected. I still remember scrolling back and forth between my photo and the document multiple times, comparing every digit until there was no doubt. It was the same number. I hardly slept that night. Every sound in the house felt louder, more intentional. The groan of settling wood, the tick of the refrigerator, even the wind pushing against the siding. When morning came, I finally decided to call the sheriff's office. I half expected them to dismiss me or tell me to drop the box off for evidence, but the woman who answered transferred me almost immediately to an investigator. He asked me to stay put and not touch anything until someone arrived. His tone had no casualness in it. It carried the kind of clipped urgency that makes your heartbeat feel uneven. 2 deputies showed up less than an hour later, their patrol car crunching over the gravel driveway. One of them, a tall man with a weathered face and sunburned neck, introduced himself as Investigator Avery. They asked me to walk them through everything, how I found the space, what I touched, and whether anyone else had been inside the house since I bought it. Avery kept glancing toward the crawl space like he already knew what they would find. When he finally crouched down and aimed his flashlight inside, he muttered something under his breath and asked his partner to photograph the area before moving anything. The next few hours blurred together. They collected the box, bagged the clothing, and took the photographs for evidence. I signed a short statement, then sat at my dining table while they made calls on their radios. One of them mentioned the name of an investigator from an old task force, someone who had retired years ago, but had worked that abduction case. Hearing them say that out loud, confirming the connection, made the whole thing shift from eerie curiosity to something heavy and personal. That missing child had been around the same age as my niece. Over the following week, the sheriff's office kept in touch. They ran the serial numbers and confirmed several phones matched devices listed in old evidence logs. A local paper even ran a small update about new findings in a cold case, but left my name out of it. Thankfully, I tried to keep working on the house, but every hammer strike echoed through me like a pulse. I began avoiding the kitchen after dark. It was not the crawl space that bothered me anymore. It was the thought that someone had stood in that exact spot years ago, hiding those things piece by piece. About 10 days later, Investigator Avery came back alone. He said the investigation was ongoing, but there was something else they had found. One of the phones still contained fragments of text messages recovered from a backup server. Short messages, mostly numbers and meeting points. He did not give me details, but his expression changed when I asked if they had found out who used the house before me. He explained to me quietly that the property had changed hands twice since the early 2000s, and that one of the prior owners had left abruptly, abandoning most of their belongings. That phrase stuck in my head long after he drove away. The house grew quieter after that visit, though not in a comforting way. I would wake in the middle of the night, convinced I heard movement under the floorboards, soft and intentional, like someone shifting their weight. I tried telling myself it was pipes or the foundation settling, but once you connect a home to a crime like that, every sound becomes suspect. I thought about selling, even called a realtor, but something held me back. It felt wrong to walk away before knowing the full truth. A few weeks later, I received a call from the sheriff's office. They had identified fingerprints on the inside of the metal box, prints belonging to one of the victim's family members. It turned out that the mother of the missing child had worked briefly for the family who owned my house decades earlier. She used to clean there on weekends, sometimes bringing her daughter along. The phones, the photos, even the clothing, they all connected to a time when several children vanished from nearby towns. They believed my crawl space had been used to hide communication devices between whoever orchestrated those disappearances. That revelation should have brought closure, but it did the opposite. Knowing that I had been living above a space once used for something that vile made the air in that kitchen impossible to breathe, I tore out the rest of the cabinets, had the entire crawl space sealed with concrete, and replaced the flooring. For a while, I tried to convince myself that normal life could return, that the house could still feel like mine. But even after repainting, reflooring, and filling the place with light, the silence underneath it never felt empty. Last month, I finally left. I did not bother selling the property. I just rented it out to a young couple who looked thrilled by the low price. I told them about the renovations, not the history. Part of me wonders if I should have warned them, but another part hopes they never find that panel or the things buried beneath it. I still drive by sometimes on my way home from work. The lights glow through the kitchen window now, warm, ordinary. Still, every time I pass, I slow down just a little, half expecting to see that loose panel leaning open again. Story 2. When I first bought the older place on Hawthorne Lane, I thought I had gotten lucky. It was a one-story house from the 1960s, recently restored, but still had that quiet charm. Wood paneling in the front room, pale green tiles in the kitchen, and a faint smell of cedar from the closets. The previous owner had passed away years earlier, and the house sat empty until a small company flipped it. It felt solid, clean, and strangely peaceful. The kind of place you settle into after a long stretch of awful rentals. For the first few weeks, everything looked perfectly normal. I had gone down to the city office to get some of the old blueprints just out of curiosity. I wanted to know how the wiring was laid out because I planned to add recessed lights in the corridor. The clerk printed out a copy for me and even joked that I was brave to live in one of those relics. I unfolded the blueprints at my kitchen table that night and immediately noticed something strange. According to the diagram, the house was supposed to have 5 bedrooms, not 4. The extra one was marked right between the corridor washroom and the guest room, but there was nothing at all there in real life except a long stretch of wall. In the beginning, I assumed it was just an old plan. Maybe the layout changed during renovations decades ago. Still, it would not leave me alone. I walked down that corridor with the blueprint in hand, measuring the distance between the doors. The math did not add up. There was a solid 7-foot gap that led nowhere. The wall in that section felt different. The paint was newer, smoother, like it had been redone recently. I knocked once, then again, and the sound that came back was not the solid thud of drywall backed by studs. It was hollow, deep, and echoing like the other side was empty. That was the moment a strange kind of curiosity took hold. I picked up a flashlight and a small hammer, thinking I'd just open a small hole to check. The earliest tap cracked the paint, and a small puff of dust fell out. I made a fist-sized opening, shone the flashlight through, and saw tiles, white tiles. I could tell from the shine that it was some kind of washroom or laundry area, but the blueprint had listed it as a bedroom. That inconsistency set my nerves on edge. Still, I kept going, widening the hole until I could squeeze through. The air inside that hidden space was heavy, like it had been sealed for decades. My flashlight beam caught dust swirling in the air, and I realized the room was smaller than I expected, hardly big enough for a single bed and a small bedside table. The tiles covered not just the floor, but halfway up the walls, the kind you'd see in old hospitals. Some of them were cracked and discolored. When I stepped in, the echo of my own movement bounced strangely around, like the sound had nowhere to escape. It gave me a strange sense that the place had been meant to contain something, not just house it. The most unsettling detail was a metal bracket on the wall, right where a bed's headboard would have gone. The floor beneath it had dark stains, faded, but clearly there, spreading out in irregular shapes. My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe paint, possibly rust. But underneath that, I knew it was not that. I crouched down and noticed tiny fragments stuck in the grout. Dark reddish-brown that had turned almost black. The smell there was faint, but distinct. A sour metallic trace that no renovation could have fully erased. Then I noticed the security camera. It was small, old-fashioned, the kind with a thick lens and a wire running behind the tiles into the wall. It pointed directly toward the spot where the bed had once been. I still remember standing there staring at that lens for a long time, like I expected it to suddenly blink to life. My flashlight caught a faint engraving on the security camera's metal frame. Sentinel Vision 1982. It was not a modern installation. Someone had put that there long before the house was ever flipped or repainted. I stepped back, uneasy now, and started searching for where the wire led. It disappeared behind a false panel near the floor. When I pried it open, I found an old junction box with 2 disconnected cables and a stack of yellowed photos wrapped in plastic. My hands hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. The photos showed that same room, same tiles, same bracket, but with a bed in place and a person lying on it. The images were grainy and colorless, but one thing was clear. Whoever took them had been watching, not documenting. I backed out of that room and sat on the corridor floor for what felt like hours. Every sound in the house suddenly felt sharper. The creak of wood, the hum of the fridge, even the faint wind outside. I sealed the opening with a tarp that night, too unsettled to look at it again. I phoned a friend, Caleb, who worked in construction, and asked him to come by the next morning. I did not tell him everything, just that I had found a hidden room. He laughed at first, said, "Old houses always had strange surprises." That laugh faded the moment he stepped inside and saw the stains. Caleb wanted to take the security camera apart, but I stopped him. I felt like disturbing anything else would somehow make things worse. We ended up patching the wall temporarily, covering the entrance with a sheet of plywood until I finally decided what to do. That night, I slept in the front room with all the lights on. Around 3:05 in the morning, the smoke detector started beeping. The low battery kind of sound. But when I climbed on a chair to remove it, I realized it was not the detector at all. The sound was coming from inside the wall near where the hidden room was. The next day, I hired an electrician to trace the old wiring. He found that one of the cables from that sealed space connected to an outlet behind my bedroom dresser, a hidden line that shouldn't have existed. He said it looked like someone had tapped into the power decades ago, possibly to run surveillance equipment. That same afternoon, I went back to the city office and asked about the previous owner. The file showed the name Evelyn Morris. She had lived there from 1967 to 1994, then vanished from local records. No sale, no forwarding address, nothing at all. The clerk said it was probably a clerical error. It did not feel like one. I left 3 weeks later. The real realtor asked why I was selling so soon, and I just told her I was relocating for work. A few days before I left, I walked through the house one last time. The plywood over the wall looked innocent, almost neat, like it belonged there. But as I turned off the lights and closed the main door, I heard something faint from the corridor. A quiet click, like an old security camera shutter being pressed once. I did not go back. Story 3. The divorce documents were still warm from the printer when I found the listing online, scrolling through real estate sites at 1:40 in the morning with a glass of whiskey that had gone watery from neglect. My 39th birthday was coming up in a week, and here I was starting from scratch after 14 years of marriage. The house caught my eye immediately, not because it was beautiful, but because it was absurdly cheap. A 3-bedroom colonial in Glenhaven Heights for barely $132,000 with recently remodeled stamped across the listing like a promise. The photos showed new paint, new fixtures, even granite countertops in the kitchen. I scheduled a viewing for that weekend, figuring the worst that could happen was wasting a Saturday afternoon. The realtor, a woman named Marissa with platinum hair and nails that clicked against her clipboard, met me at the property on a humid Saturday in August. She looked nervous, constantly checking her phone and rushing through the tour like she had somewhere else to be. The place smelled like new paint and carpet cleaner, almost overwhelming in its intensity. Every room had been gutted and redone. New drywall, new floors, everything pristine and sterile like a model home. When I asked about the previous owners, Marissa just shrugged and said something vague about a job relocation. The price was firm, she said, and they wanted a quick cash sale. No inspections, no contingencies. I should have walked away right there, but desperation has a way of ruining your judgment. And I needed somewhere to live before my former wife's patience ran out. I settled in 3 weeks later with nothing at all but boxes and regret. The first few months were actually peaceful. The neighbors kept to themselves. The house stayed cool despite the August heat, and I began to think possibly I had gotten lucky for once. I set up my work room in the smallest bedroom, hung my pictures in the corridor, even bought a grill for the backyard. The neighborhood was quiet, full of older couples and young families who waved politely, but never stopped to chat. It was not until early January when I was shoveling snow from the driveway that everything began to unravel. An elderly man from across the street, Earl something, shuffled over with his own shovel and started helping without asking. We worked in silence for a while before he mentioned almost casually how nice it was to see someone finally living in the house again after what happened to the Parkers. The Parkers? I stopped shoveling and asked him what he meant, playing dumb, even though my chest had gone tight. Earl leaned on his shovel, his breath coming out in white puffs, and explained to me how the Parker family, a couple in their 40s with 2 teenage kids, had lived there for 8 years before vanishing one weekend the previous April. No moving trucks, no goodbye parties, just gone between a Friday night and Monday morning. Their cars were still in the driveway for weeks until someone finally towed them away. Mail piled up until the post office stopped delivering. Earl said he'd called the cops after 2 weeks, worried something had happened, but they just said the family had relocated and the house was being sold. The strange thing, he said while scraping ice from his shovel blade, was that nobody ever saw the house go on the market. One day there were contractors gutting the place, and a month later I was settling in. That conversation haunted me for days. I tried calling Marissa, but her number was disconnected. The real estate company she supposedly worked for had no record of her when I phoned their main office. My stomach churned as I pulled out my closing documents, spreading them across the kitchen table under the harsh overhead light. Everything looked legitimate at first glance. Signatures, notary seals, official letterheads. But when I began making calls to verify, nothing at all checked out. The notary license number did not exist. The title company had no record of my transaction. The attorney listed on the papers had been disbarred 3 years ago. Even the bank account I had wired my money to was registered to a shell company that dissolved the day after my payment cleared. I spent the next week diving deep into property records at the county courthouse, telling my boss I had the flu while I sat in that fluorescent-lit cellar surrounded by dusty filing cabinets and ancient computers. The chain of ownership for my address was a maze of false leads and dead ends. According to official records, the Parkers still own the house. There was no transfer deed, no sale documentation, nothing at all. But when I dug deeper, even their ownership became questionable. The deed from when they bought the house in 2015 referenced a previous owner who, according to death certificates, had been dead for 6 years at the time of sale. Every document led to another impossibility. Another person who did not exist or could not have signed what they supposedly signed. The recorder's office clerk, a thin man with thick glasses who'd been working there for 20 years, pulled me aside one afternoon and whispered that he'd seen this pattern before. Always with houses where families had vanished, always in different counties, but the paperwork followed the same template. The revelation that hit me hardest came when I found a cached version of an old real estate listing from 2009. The photos showed my house, but the interior was different. Not just furniture and decorations, but the actual layout. Rooms that did not exist anymore. A cellar entrance where my pantry now stood. Windows in places where I had solid walls. I printed everything and drove home in a daze, parking in my driveway as the sun set behind the identical suburban roofs. Inside, I walked through each room with the old photos in my hand, trying to match what I was seeing with what had been. That's when I noticed it. The dimensions were wrong. The house was smaller now, possibly by a third. Where had all that space gone? I picked up a measuring tape and started checking walls, finding spots where the drywall sounded hollow in places that should have been exterior walls, places where the house should have ended but did not. I became obsessed with the walls. Every night after work, I'd tap along them with my knuckles, listening for changes in sound, marking hollow spots with pencil. The master bedroom's east wall was the worst. It ran 15 feet longer than it should have according to the original blueprints I had found. But from outside, the house looked normal. The math did not work. I told myself I was losing it, that stress and paranoia were making me imagine things, but then I began hearing them. Muffled sounds from behind the walls at night. Not mice or settling wood, but intentional sounds, footsteps, breathing. Once, I swear I heard someone crying, but it was so faint I could not tell if it was a child or an adult. I had pressed my ear against the drywall and hold my breath, trying to pinpoint the source, but the sounds would stop the moment I got close, like whoever was there could sense me listening. 3 weeks into my investigation, I could not take it anymore. At 1:40 in the morning on a Wednesday, armed with a hammer and a flashlight, I went to the master bedroom's impossible wall. The earliest hit cracked the drywall. The second punched through, and a smell hit me. Stale air mixed with something organic, like a closed room where someone had been living for too long. I pulled away chunks of drywall, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Behind it was another layer of wall, older with faded wallpaper showing tiny yellow roses. I kept going, demolishing a section about 2 feet wide, until I found it. A door painted over so many times it almost blended with the wall. The doorknob had been removed, leaving just a hole filled with plaster. I clawed at the paint around the edges until I could get my fingers in the gap and pulled. The door opened inward with a grinding sound, revealing a narrow corridor that shouldn't exist. The corridor stretched about 20 feet, lit by a single bulb that somehow still had power. The walls were covered in that same rose wallpaper, but sections had been torn away, revealing messages scratched directly into the drywall underneath. Names and dates going back decades. The Carvers, 1988, 1992. Rachel and Kevin Hanley, 1996, 2000. The Parkers, 2015, 2022. Each family name I recognized from my research. People who had supposedly sold their houses and moved away. At the end of the corridor were 3 doors. The earliest opened to a small room with a chemical toilet, packages of food and water bottles, some empty, some still sealed. The second room had 4 mattresses on the floor, blankets neatly folded at the foot of each one. Children's toys were scattered in one corner, including a stuffed elephant with one eye missing. The third door was locked from the outside with a padlock that looked brand new. Behind it, I could hear movement, shuffling feet, whispered voices that went silent when I touched the lock. I ran back through the hidden corridor, stumbling over my own feet, and grabbed bolt cutters from my garage. When I returned and cut the lock, the door swung open to reveal 4 people huddled in the corner of a windowless room, a man and woman in their 40s and 2 teenagers, a boy and girl. They were thin, pale, wearing clothes that had been washed too many times. The woman started sobbing when she saw me. They were the Parkers. They'd been living in the walls of their own house for nearly 11 months, moved from room to room through a network of hidden passages by someone who came every few days with food and water. Someone who wore a mask and never spoke. The same person who'd approached them one night with a gun, forced them into the walls, then renovated their house around them, sealing them inside. They'd heard me living in their house, heard me watching TV in what used to be their front room, heard me on phone calls in their kitchen. They'd been too terrified to make noise because he'd threatened to kill them if anyone found out. But lately, they'd been getting desperate as the food deliveries became less frequent. I phoned 911 immediately, but even as I explained the situation, I knew how insane it sounded. The patrol officers arrived within minutes, followed by ambulances and what looked like every news van in the state. The investigation that followed uncovered a network of properties across 5 states with similar hidden spaces, some still containing families who'd been missing for years. The person orchestrating it all was never caught. The fake documents were so sophisticated that federal investigators suspected multiple people were involved. Someone with access to government databases, someone in real estate, someone in construction. The Parkers were relocated into witness protection after receiving death threats, and I left that same week, staying in hotels until I could find a legitimate apartment. The house on Glenhaven Heights was torn down a month later, revealing an elaborate maze of hidden passages between the walls. Sometimes I still wake up at night wondering if the apartment I am renting now has hollow spaces behind its walls. If someone might be living just inches away from where I sleep, watching, waiting, preparing documents with names that don't exist for the next person to move in. Story 4. The house on Carver Lane caught my eye during a particularly bad stretch in my life. 28 and fresh out of an ugly breakup, I needed somewhere quiet to rebuild myself. Somewhere that did not echo with memories of shared meals and whispered promises. The realtor, a chatty woman named Denise with hair the color of old caramel, mentioned the place had been empty for 7 months. She kept adjusting her oversized glasses while explaining how the previous tenants had broken their lease early. Something about a job transfer to Spokane. The rent was surprisingly affordable for a 2-story house with original hardwood floors and a sprawling backyard that backed up to a wooded area. I signed the lease that same afternoon, ignoring the musty smell that looked to seep from the walls and Denise's nervous habit of checking her phone every few minutes. Moving in took me 3 days in late August, hauling boxes up those creaky stairs until my legs burned and my back screamed for mercy. The master bedroom had this beautiful bay window that overlooked the backyard, though the view was partially blocked by an enormous oak tree whose branches scraped against the glass whenever the wind picked up. I still remember unpacking my kitchen stuff first, with care arranging my grandmother's vintage plates in the cabinets and hanging my collection of mismatched coffee mugs on the little wooden rack near the stove. That first week felt like acting out a version of adulthood, like I was pretending to be a real adult with a real life instead of someone whose entire world had crumbled just 2 months earlier. The neighbors looked friendly enough. The Hadleys next door had twin boys who rode their bikes up and down the street every evening. And old Mr. Harlan across the way would wave from his porch, where he sat smoking his pipe and reading newspapers until sunset. The first sign that something was not right came about 2 weeks after I had settled in. I had bought a whole rotisserie chicken from the grocery store on my way home from work. I was an administrative assistant at a medical clinic downtown. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. I distinctly remember putting half of it in a Tupperware container for lunch the next day. Even wrote Tuesday lunch on a sticky note and slapped it on top. But when I opened the fridge the next morning, blur-eyed and desperate for coffee, the container was there, but fully empty, just a few grease stains on the bottom. I stood there in my pajamas, holding that empty container like it was some kind of puzzle piece that did not fit. My first thought was that possibly I had eaten it and forgotten. Maybe I had had one of those midnight snacking sessions where you hardly remember getting out of bed. But the chicken bones were not in the trash, and I had checked everywhere, even the washroom wastebasket, which made 0 sense. But my brain was reaching for any explanation that would hold. Then came the yogurt incident 3 days later. I had splurged on this fancy Greek yogurt with honey and almonds. The expensive stuff in the glass jars that made me feel sophisticated. Bought 6 jars on Monday. Ate one that night while watching reality TV and judging people's life choices. Tuesday morning, only 3 jars left. Not empty this time, just gone. Vanished like they'd never existed. The refrigerator light flickered when I stood there counting and recounting as if it was mocking my confusion. I actually called my sister Laura in Tucson, talking to her while I paced around my kitchen, opening and closing cabinets like the yogurt might be hiding behind the cereal boxes. She said, maybe I was stress eating without realizing it, that the breakup was affecting me more than I thought. Her voice had that careful tone people use when they think you might be losing it, all gentle and measured like you are a spooked horse that might bolt. The lights were what truly began to mess with my head. I would wake up at random hours, 2:10 in the morning for 42, sometimes right around 3, and there'd be a glow coming from downstairs. Not every night, but often enough that I began keeping a notebook on my bedside table to track it. November 12th, kitchen light on. November 16th, corridor and front room. November 19th, just the lamp by the couch, the one with the crooked shade I kept meaning to fix. Each time I had to creep down those stairs, armed with a baseball bat I had found in the garage, my bare feet silent on the cold wood. The house would be empty, of course, just me and my hammering pulse and the hum of electricity through old wiring. I had turned everything off, double-checked the locks, deadbolt, chain, even the little latch on the rear door that led to the laundry room. Then climbed back to bed where I had lie awake listening to the house settle, every creak and groan sounding like footsteps. Started to notice other things too, little details that made my skin crawl with unease. My shampoo bottle looked to empty faster than it should, going from half full to nearly gone in just a few days when typically a bottle lasted me 2 months. The laundry detergent too. I had bought the jumbo size in early October, and by the end of the month, it was down to the last few loads. Even stranger, sometimes I had come home to find the toilet seat up in the downstairs washroom, which made no sense because I stayed alone and I am meticulous about putting it down. A habit drilled into me by growing up with 3 sisters. Once I found a towel on the washroom floor that I did not recognize. This threadbare blue thing with a bleach stain shaped like Florida. I held it up to the light, trying to remember if possibly it came with the house. If Denise had mentioned anything about leaving linens behind, but my memory came up blank. By the first week of December, I was hardly sleeping. I had installed one of those doorbell security camera, even though the expense made me wince, and I obsessively checked the footage every morning. Nothing, just the occasional cat slinking across the porch and leaves dancing in the wind. But the food kept disappearing. An entire loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter I had just opened, even a whole package of deli ham that I knew I had put in the meat drawer. I began taking photos of my fridge and pantry before leaving for work, comparing them when I got home like I was playing some twisted version of Spot the Difference. My colleague Bethany noticed the dark circles under my eyes, kept offering me her concealer during lunch breaks. I wanted to tell her everything, but how do you explain that your house might be eating your groceries without sounding fully unhinged? The point where I cracked came 2 days before New Year. I had taken a week off work, planning to deep clean the house and possibly paint the spare bedroom this cheerful yellow color I had seen in a magazine. But first, I finally decided to be smart about it. Ordered these movement sensors online, the kind that connect to your phone and alert you whenever they detect movement. Spent an entire afternoon setting them up. 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the corridor, 2 in the front room, even 1 pointing at that rear door to the laundry room. The guy at the electronics store had looked at me funny when I bought so many. Probably thought I was paranoid about burglars. If only it were that simple. That first night with the sensors, I hardly dozed off. Phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. Then at precisely 3:14 in the morning, my phone lit up with notifications. Motion detected. Kitchen motion detected. Hallway motion detected. Laundry room. I phoned the cops right then and there, whispering into the phone while I locked my bedroom door and shoved my dresser against it. The dispatcher, a woman with a smoky voice who sounded like she'd heard it all, explained to me to stay put and keep the door locked. 2 patrol officers arrived within 15 minutes, though it felt like hours as I sat on my bed, clutching that baseball bat and listening to every sound in the house. Patrol Officer O'Neill was older, probably close to retirement, with gray stubble and eyes that looked tired even at 3:05 in the morning. His partner, Patrol Officer Ramos, could not have been much older than me, kept fidgeting with his radio while they searched the house. I watched from the top of the stairs as they searched from room to room, flashlights cutting through the darkness, checking closets and behind furniture. They found nothing at all, nobody, just an empty house with all the windows locked tight. O'Neill said possibly it was mice or even possums that got in somehow, triggering the sensors. But I saw the look they exchanged, that universal expression of dealing with a hysterical woman who's probably imagining things. The next night, same thing. 3:05 in the morning, sensors going crazy. This time I had my phone recording video when the cops arrived, showing them the timestamp, the pattern of movement from the kitchen through the corridor to the laundry room. Patrol Officer Ramos looked more interested this time, asked if I had noticed anything missing besides food. When I mentioned the toiletries and the strange towel, he wrote it all down in his little notebook, his pen scratching against the paper in the quiet house. They searched again, more thoroughly this time. O'Neill even went into the cellar, a creepy unfinished space I had avoided since settling in, full of old pipes and concrete walls that looked to sweat moisture. Still nothing at all. But Ramos pulled me aside before they left, explained to me to call immediately if it happened again, gave me his direct number scribbled on the back of his business card. His hand lingered on my shoulder for just a moment, and I could see real concern in his eyes, not the dismissive look I had gotten used to. The third night changed everything. New Year's Eve, and I was sitting in my front room with all the lights in the house blazing, drinking my fourth cup of coffee and watching the movement sensor app like it was the season finale of my favorite show. 3:12 in the morning, there it was. Kitchen sensor triggered, but this time I did not call immediately. I waited, watched the pattern. Kitchen to corridor, corridor to laundry room, then nothing at all for 5 minutes. Then the laundry room sensor went off again, stayed triggered for almost 30 seconds, like something was just standing there. That's when I phoned Ramos directly. He answered on the second ring, sounded wide awake like he'd been expecting my call. Told me he was already on his way to lock myself in the bedroom again. But I was done hiding. I stayed at the top of the stairs, recording everything on my phone, watching as Ramos and O'Neill arrived with 2 other patrol officers this time, their flashlights creating a light show through my windows. They went straight to the laundry room this time, like they'd been thinking about it, planning their approach. I heard Ramos calling out to O'Neill, his voice sharp with excitement or possibly fear. Then more voices, urgent but controlled, the sound of furniture being moved. 20 minutes later, Ramos came up to get me, his face pale under the corridor light. They'd found it behind the washer and dryer, a hatch painted the same faded white as the walls, with hinges so well oiled they did not make a sound. Behind it was a crawl space that connected to the cellar through a passage nobody knew existed, not mentioned in any of the house documentation. Inside that space, they found a makeshift living area. Sleeping bag, canned goods, empty yogurt jars, my yogurt jars, lined up neatly against the wall, water bottles, a battery-powered lantern, even a small mirror propped up on a milk crate. Whoever had been living there was gone. Must have heard the sirens and escaped through the cellar while the patrol officers were coming through the front. The investigation revealed more than I wanted to know. The person had been coming and going through a broken ventilation grate in the cellar that led outside, hidden behind overgrown bushes near the back of the house. They'd even fashioned a crude pulley system to move the grate from inside, explaining how they could come and go without leaving obvious traces. Investigator Hale, who took over the case after that night, found evidence suggesting someone had been using that crawl space for years, long before I settled in. There were date markings carved into the wooden beams. The oldest one from 2014. Food wrappers stuffed into the walls, some so old they were practically fossilized. The previous tenants who broke their lease early, Hale tracked them down in Spokane. They'd experienced the same things, but convinced themselves they were going crazy, choosing to leave rather than dig deeper. Denise, the realtor, claimed she knew nothing at all. But Hale discovered she'd been giving discounts on the rent for years, cycling through tenants who rarely lasted more than 7 months. I left the day after Christmas, stayed with my sister Laura, until I found a studio apartment downtown. Small, cramped, but entirely mine with nowhere for anyone to hide. The patrol officers never caught whoever had been living in that crawl space. Hale phoned me a few weeks later to say they'd found similar setups in 2 other rental properties in the state. Same careful construction, same pattern of coming out around 3:05 in the morning when people were in their deepest sleep. They think it might be the same person, someone who'd figured out how to exist in the spaces we don't think to look. I still inspect my movement sensors every night in my new place, even though there's literally nowhere anyone could hide. Sometimes at 3:05 in the morning, I wake up for no reason, my body trained to expect those notifications. I make myself get up, check the locks, peer into my tiny closet. Everything's always fine, always empty, always safe. But I keep checking anyway because now I know that the spaces we think are ours might have room for someone else. Someone patient enough to wait until we're asleep to live their parallel life in our homes. Story 5. I settled into that apartment with relief more than excitement. After an ugly breakup, I just wanted somewhere quiet, a place where no one knew me, where I could close the door and not think about anyone else's noise or drama. It was a small 1-bedroom unit in an old building on the far side of town. The kind of place that smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner, even after you'd been there for a week. The landlord, a polite older man named Edwin, had seemed straightforward. He handed me the keys, made a few jokes about the stubborn plumbing, and wished me luck. I still remember thinking he looked tired, but innocent. The earliest few nights were normal enough. I unpacked, worked remotely, and tried to make the space feel mine. The walls were painted a flat beige, the kind that hides cracks if you do not look too closely. I hung string lights, set up my laptop on the kitchen table, and streamed old sitcoms to keep the quiet from getting too heavy. But something about the apartment's stillness began to gnaw at me. Every creak in the ceiling sounded intentional, like the wood shifting just a little too rhythmically, as if reacting to my movements. By the end of the first week, I noticed something strange near the vent above my bed. It was a tiny mark, smaller than a grain of rice, right at the edge of the metal slats. I thought it was just a nail hole or possibly a dent from a screwdriver. But when I looked closer, it was perfectly circular, a little too clean. My stomach tightened as I leaned closer and saw a dark dot in the center, like the lens of a security camera. I laughed out loud at myself for even thinking that. Who would hide a security camera there? Still, once the thought planted itself in my mind, it would not leave. 3 days later, curiosity won. I picked up a screwdriver and decided to check one of the light switch plates in the corridor. That's when I noticed the same kind of hole just above the screw, a pin-sized opening that looked identical to the one by the vent. I hesitated for a long moment, standing there barefoot in my corridor, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, but I unscrewed the plate anyway. Behind it was a thin wire, black and almost invisible against the drywall. It ran upward into the wall cavity. My hands felt clammy. I followed the wire as far as I could without breaking anything, and it disappeared straight into the ceiling. I could not stop thinking about that wire. The next morning, I borrowed a stepladder from my neighbor, a friendly woman named Denise, who lived across the hall. She laughed when I said I needed it to check something strange in the ceiling, probably assuming it was a light fixture problem. When I climbed up and opened the narrow attic hatch above the corridor, a gust of warm, stale air hit me. The smell was awful, like old insulation and something metallic. I pulled my phone's flashlight app on and aimed it around. That was when I saw it. A small device taped near the vent shaft with a faint red light blinking once every few seconds. In the beginning, I thought it might be part of the building's security system. But as I got closer, I saw the thin antenna and a label with a Wi-Fi network name printed in tiny letters. The name did not match my router or any neighbor's connection I recognized. My heart began racing. I gently pulled the tape back and revealed a pinhole-sized security camera lens attached to a transmitter the size of a deck of cards. There was dust around it, but it looked far too new to belong in an attic like that. Someone had put it there intentionally. I spent the rest of the day spiraling between disbelief and panic. Every vent, every outlet cover, every smoke detector suddenly felt like a threat. I tried to tell myself it was some strange leftover security setup from a previous tenant, but when I emailed the property manager, they explained to me the building did not even have central surveillance. That night, I hardly slept. I unplugged my Wi-Fi, turned off every light, and sat in the dark with my phone flashlight aimed at the ceiling. Every sound, pipes clicking, the refrigerator cycling made me flinch. The following morning, I phoned the cops. 2 patrol officers arrived within an hour, one of them carrying a small inspection security camera. They went through the attic and my walls more with care than I had. When they came down, they looked disturbed. One of them said quietly, "Ma'am, there are multiple devices up there." They counted 6 tiny security cameras, all hidden behind vents and light fixtures. Each one was wired to a transmitter pointed toward the street. They said the signal likely bounced to a nearby receiver. I still remember sitting at my kitchen table clutching a coffee mug just to keep my hands occupied while they made calls for a warrant. They came back later that evening with an investigator and a technician who specialized in digital forensics. The technician carried a small scanner and a portable monitor. He climbed into the attic again, and within minutes he called down that the devices were broadcasting an open feed. When he patched into the signal, the investigator's expression hardened. The live footage showed my bedroom, the bed, the dresser, the bedside table, everything. My knees went weak. The technician muted the screen quickly, but the image burned into my head. I had been living there for nearly 4 weeks. The next few hours felt unreal. They traced the wireless transmitters and determined the signal had been routed through a small server found behind a wall panel in the cellar. It was not connected to the building's main network. It had its own separate line running outside the property. The investigator asked if I had any information about the landlord before Edwin. That was when I still remembered the previous owner had passed away and Edwin had been managing the property for only a year. The investigator exchanged a look with his partner and explained to me they'd need to bring him in for questioning. The building was handled like a crime scene for 3 days. I stayed with a friend across town while investigators removed drywall and collected the hidden devices. Every new discovery made the situation worse. They found microphones, too, tucked behind wall outlets and vents. Apparently, the footage had been streaming to a private server that linked to a subscription-based website. The investigator later explained to me that some of the recordings had timestamps going back months before I even settled in. My mind refused to accept it. How many people had lived there unaware? When Edwin was finally arrested, it hardly felt real. He had admitted to installing the equipment himself, claiming it was for security reasons, but the footage told a different story. Investigators said he'd been watching tenants for entertainment and selling access to the feed online. Thinking of strangers sitting somewhere, watching me sleep, watching me change clothes made me nauseous. The apartment no longer felt like a place I had lived in. It felt like a set, a stage. Every moment of privacy had been a lie. I eventually had to go back to pack my things. Even though the cops had already cleared the place, I could not bring myself to be alone inside. Every time I stepped through the door, it felt like eyes were still hidden somewhere behind the walls. I still remember settling in silence, stuffing clothes into boxes as quickly as possible. The vents, the light switches, even the mirror in the washroom made my skin crawl. When I finally locked the door for the last time, it was like shedding a chapter one wanted to erase but never could. The investigator phoned me a few weeks later to update me. They had traced the streams to several online forums where Edwin had uploaded live feeds under fake usernames. Some of the viewers had even paid him through crypto payments. He faced multiple charges, including invasion of privacy and illegal surveillance. Hearing that gave me a strange mix of anger and vindication. It was horrifying, but at least it meant someone was finally being held accountable. I still inspect my ceiling vents in every new place I stay. I can't stop myself. Even now, I catch myself thinking about all the moments that security camera must have seen. The phone calls I made to my mother. The nights I cried after work. The times I danced around the kitchen while cooking. Moments that were supposed to be mine. It's strange how easily trust can be destroyed by something you can't even see. I learned more about paranoia in that 1 month than I had in my entire life. Sometimes people on forums ask me why I did not notice sooner, how I could have missed something like that. The truth is, you never picture your home being a stage for someone else's entertainment. You never think to question the silence or the air vent above your bed. But once it happens to you, once you've lived inside that kind of invasion, you never fully unsee it. Even when I close my eyes, that little red light in the attic still blinks in the dark. Story 6. 3 months ago, I finally closed on a house in Eugene after my divorce documents went through. My brother kept joking that 35 was the new 22, trying to cheer me up about starting over, but the little ranch-style place on Pine Hollow Avenue actually did feel like the clean restart I desperately needed. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly families and retired folks who kept their lawns perfect and waved when you drove past. I had been sleeping on my brother's couch for 7 months while the lawyers sorted everything out, so having my own space again felt incredible. The first week was all about unpacking boxes and trying to remember which one had the coffee maker. I had taken a month off from my job at the architectural firm to get settled and honestly just breathe for the first time in what felt like years. The place still smelled like new paint from where I had redone the front room walls. And every morning, I'd sit on the back deck with my coffee, watching the fog roll through the pine trees behind the property. The text started on a Monday morning, precisely 11 days after I had settled in. I was making breakfast, just scrambled eggs and toast, when my phone vibrated on the counter. The number was not saved in my contacts, just a local area code I did not recognize. The message read, "Nice green flannel." The one with the small rip near the left pocket. "You should probably sew that up." I looked down at my shirt, running my finger along the exact tear they'd described. A tiny hole I had been meaning to fix for months. My first thought was that possibly it was someone from the moving company. They'd seen all my stuff, handled my clothes when they packed the bedroom. But something about the way it was written made my chest feel tight. I texted back asking who it was, but the response came immediately. "You burnt the toast. Better check the smoke alarm batteries while you are at it." The toast was indeed slightly blackened on one edge, still sitting on the plate next to the stove where I just pulled it out 10 seconds earlier. I walked to every window in the house, yanking the blinds closed hard enough that the plastic slats clattered against each other. The kitchen window faced the backyard, fully fenced in with a 6-foot privacy fence I had specifically loved about the place. The front room had those big windows facing the street, but there were thick hedges along the sidewalk that the previous owner had let grow wild and tall. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to see through the gaps in the leaves, but could not spot anyone out there. Another text came through. "The blinds won't help. You missed the small window in the corridor washroom, the one with the frosted glass that you never thought anyone could see through." My legs felt weak as I practically ran to the corridor washroom. And there it was, a narrow window up high that I had fully forgotten about. The frosted glass doing nothing at all to hide the basic shapes and movements inside the house. The rational part of my brain kept trying to find explanations while I stood on the toilet lid, struggling with the old paint-sealed window lock. Maybe it was the previous owner playing some sick prank, or neighborhood kids with too much time on their hands. But kids would not know about the shirt, would not know these details. My phone vibrated again. "Your ex-wife had the same panicked look when she found those emails on your laptop. But we both know that was not truly why she left, don't we?" Everything in my body went cold. Nobody knew about the emails except me, Claire, and our marriage counselor. The emails were not even the affair she'd suspected. Just me talking to a headhunter about job opportunities in California, planning to uproot our entire life without telling her. It was the betrayal of that secret planning that had truly ended things, not the suspected infidelity she never found evidence of because it never existed. I phoned the cops immediately, but the patrol officer who answered sounded like she was reading from a script when she explained they could not do much about non-threatening messages. The texts were creepy. Sure, but there were no direct threats of violence, no explicit statements about harming me. She said I block the number and document everything. Maybe file for a restraining order if I could figure out who was sending them. While I was still on the phone with her, another message popped up. "Calling the cops won't help. Dispatcher Dana always says that, doesn't she? She's working the dispatch desk today because of her broken ankle skiing accident 3 weeks ago." I walked outside with the phone still pressed to my ear, looking up and down the empty street. The patrol officer on the line was indeed named Dana. And when I asked about her ankle, there was this long, uncomfortable pause before she admitted she'd fractured it skiing in Idaho recently. That's when the real panic started eating at me. This person knew things that required access to so many different parts of my life. My divorce documents, my daily routines, even real-time information about the police dispatcher. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with the carrier demanding they trace the number. The customer service rep kept transferring me to different departments, each one more confused than the last about what I was asking for. Finally, I got through to someone in their fraud department who took me seriously. He put me on hold for almost 30 minutes, and when he came back his voice had changed fully. The number was registered to a prepaid phone paid for in cash at a convenience store in my neighborhood 6 weeks ago. But here's what made him nervous enough to give me information he probably was not supposed to share. The phone's GPS showed it had been inside a 3-block radius of my house for the past 11 days, basically since I had settled in. The carrier guy, his name was Julian, started asking me these rapid-fire questions about whether I had noticed any strange cars, any repair vans that stayed too long, anyone following me. He said they could narrow down the GPS ping to a more specific area if I wanted to file a formal request with law enforcement. While he was explaining the process, I picked up my laptop and pulled up Google Maps, drawing mental circles around my house, trying to figure out where someone could park and still see into my windows. 3 blocks was not much in this neighborhood. Mostly single-family homes with driveways, a few rental properties, and that small apartment complex on Elm Lane that always had different cars coming and going. Julian gave me a case number and said he'd personally flagged this for their security team. And that's when he mentioned something that sent my whole body tense up. "Sir, the GPS shows the phone has been stationary for the last 4 hours. It hasn't moved from its current position since around 6:20 that morning." I looked at the clock on my laptop. It was already past 10:15 in the morning. This person had been sitting somewhere nearby for 4 hours, just watching, texting, knowing precisely what I was doing inside my own house. I picked up my car keys and told Julian I was going to drive around the neighborhood, see if I could spot anything unusual. He tried to tell me to wait for the cops, but I was already out the door, my pulse hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I drove slowly down each street in a 3-block radius, looking for anyone sitting in their car, any vans with tinted windows, anything that looked wrong. On my second loop, I turned onto Birchview Road, 2 streets over from mine. And that's when I saw it. A beige Honda Accord with local plates parked perfectly to have a clear view down the gap between 2 houses, straight into my front room window. The car was running, exhaust visible in the cool morning air, and I could make out the dark silhouette of someone in the driver's seat, holding something up to their face that looked like binoculars, or possibly a security camera with a long lens. I pulled up behind the Camry and sat there for possibly 10 seconds trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call 911 right there, but another part needed to know who this was. Needed to see their face. I got out of my car slowly, my phone recording video in my jacket pocket, and walked toward the driver's side window. The person inside must have seen me in their side mirror, because they suddenly lowered whatever she was holding and started fumbling with something in the passenger seat. When I got close enough to see inside, my brain could not quite process what I was looking at. It was a woman probably in her late 50s with gray hair, pulled back in a neat bun, and wearing what looked like medical scrubs. She had this whole setup on her passenger seat, a laptop, multiple notebooks, what appeared to be printed photos of my house from different angles, and a telephoto security camera. She looked at me through the window with these pale blue eyes that looked fully calm, almost serene, like we were meeting at a coffee shop instead of this insane situation. Before I could say anything, she rolled down the window halfway and spoke in this soft, measured voice that sounded like she'd rehearsed it. "Hello, Evan. I was wondering when you'd find me. My name is Marlene, and I used to live in your house. Well, not your house precisely. The house that was there before they tore it down and built yours." She pulled out a folder from between the seats and held it toward me with steady hands. "I grew up there, lived there for 41 years until the bank took it in foreclosure 6 years ago. My husband died in the room where your front room is now. Cancer. Took him 14 months to go, and I sat with him every single day in that exact spot where your television is." Her voice never wavered, never showed emotion, just stated facts like she was reading a grocery list. Inside the folder were old photographs of a fully different house, a 2-story colonial with white siding and green shutters, and dozens of pictures of her family throughout the years, birthdays, Christmases, a wedding reception in what was now my backyard. She explained how she'd been working as a home care aide since losing the house, how she'd saved every penny to try to buy it back. But the developer got there first and demolished everything. She'd watched them tear it down from this exact spot on Birchview Road, she said, counted every swing of the wrecking ball. The personal details she knew about my divorce came from a paralegal at my lawyer's office, where she'd done overnight cleaning shifts for extra money. She'd read through papers left on desks, memorized details about the new owner who would be living where her life used to exist. The thing about Patrol Officer Dana came from her Patrol Officer's scanner app, which she listened to religiously, especially when it involved the neighborhood. She showed me notebooks filled with observations about everyone who lived within a 5-block radius, their routines, their visitors, their Amazon delivery patterns. It was not just me. She had files on all the neighbors, but I was special because I was living in her space, sleeping where her children had slept, cooking where she'd made 41 years of dinners. I stood there on Birchview Road for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 minutes, listening to her quietly explain how she'd figured out ways to see into the house from various angles, how she'd tested different positions until she found the perfect spot. She talked about the washroom window like it was her greatest discovery, how the frosted glass created shadows that let her track movement through the house. When I told her I was calling the cops, she just nodded and said she understood that she'd been expecting it since the day I settled in. While we waited for them to arrive, she asked if she could have one more look at the house just from the street. And something in her voice finally cracked. Not much, just a tiny tremor when she said the word house. The patrol officers took her away quietly. No scene, no fight. She was charged with stalking and harassment, and I got a restraining order that prevents her from coming within 600 feet of the property. But even now, 2 months later, I still inspect that washroom window every morning. Still feel exposed in my own front room. And sometimes I wonder if she's out there somewhere beyond that 600 feet line, still watching, still remembering the house that isn't there anymore. Story 7. About 7 months ago, at 35, I finally saved enough to buy my first place, a small ranch-style house on Alder Drive in a quiet neighborhood outside Dayton, Ohio. The house needed work, sure, with its peeling yellow paint and overgrown backyard. But after years of cramped apartments and noisy neighbors, having my own space felt like I had won something I was never supposed to get. I worked remotely as a documentation editor for a cloud services firm, which meant I spent most days alone in my workroom. Just me and my laptop, and the occasional online meeting with coworkers scattered across different time zones. The solitude never bothered me. Actually, I preferred it that way, especially after going through a rough divorce the previous year that left me craving peace and quiet more than anything else. The closet thing started about 3 weeks after I settled in. Subtle at first, hardly worth mentioning. Every morning when I woke up, the bedroom closet door would be cracked open possibly an inch or two, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. Now this closet was not anything special, just a standard sliding door with those mirrored panels that made the small bedroom look bigger than it actually was. In the beginning, I blamed the house settling. Or possibly the door was not properly aligned on its track because old houses do strange things, right? But here's what stayed in my head. I specifically remembered closing that door fully every single night before bed, pushing it firmly until I heard that little click that meant it was fully shut. Because I had this thing about closed doors and organized spaces, probably from years of living in chaos with my ex who left everything open and scattered everywhere. After about a week of this morning routine, wake up, see the gap in the closet door, feel mildly annoyed, I finally decided to get serious about fixing it. I picked up my toolbox from the garage, adjusted the rollers on the track, tightened every screw I could find, even sprayed some WD-40 on the mechanism for good measure. That night, I made absolutely sure to close it tight. Actually stood there for a solid minute, watching to see if it would slide back open on its own. But nothing at all happened. The next morning, same damn gap, possibly even wider this time. Like whatever was causing this wanted me to know my little repair job meant nothing at all. I began taking photos with my phone each night after closing it, and each morning when I found it open, creating this strange little collection of evidence that I was not going crazy. The point where I cracked came on a Tuesday morning in late October, when I woke up, and the door was open about 6 and wide enough that I could see into the darkness of the closet from my bed. Something about seeing that black gap in the morning light made my chest lock up in a way I could not explain. Like when you are a kid and you are convinced something's hiding in the shadows, but you are too scared to check. I actually called my buddy Marcus that afternoon, asked him if he wanted to come over for beers, and casually mentioned the door situation, hoping he'd offer some logical explanation I hadn't thought of. Marcus said possibly I was sleepwalking, getting up in the middle of the night to open it without remembering, which looked reasonable enough, except for one thing. I had never sleepwalked in my entire life, not once. And my ex would definitely have mentioned it during one of our many arguments if I had been wandering around at night doing strange stuff. That's when I finally decided to buy a security camera, one of those small Wi-Fi enabled ones you can hide pretty much anywhere, because I needed to know what was happening in my bedroom while I slept. The guy at the electronics store recommended this tiny thing hardly bigger than a golf ball that could record in night vision and save everything to the cloud automatically. I mounted it on top of my dresser behind some books, angled perfectly to capture both my bed and the closet door, then spent an embarrassing amount of time testing different positions to make sure it caught everything without being obvious. That first night with the security camera running, I actually had trouble falling asleep. Kept staring at the closet door like it might suddenly spring open while I watched. But eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off around midnight. My phone set to alert me if the security camera detected any movement. The notification woke me at precisely 3:17 in the morning, my phone buzzing insistently on the bedside table. I picked up it with clumsy fingers, still half asleep and confused, squinting at the screen that showed a movement alert from the bedroom security camera. My pulse began hammering as I opened the app, expecting to see myself sleepwalking just like Marcus had said, ready to laugh at my own paranoia and possibly schedule a doctor's appointment to figure out why I had suddenly developed this strange nighttime habit. But when the live feed loaded, I was still in bed, clearly visible in the grainy night vision footage, lying on my side, facing away from the closet. The door, however, was moving, sliding open inch by inch with intentional slowness, like someone was being extremely careful not to make any noise. I stayed perfectly still in bed, watching my phone screen while pretending to sleep. Every muscle in my body tensed like a coiled spring. Through the security camera feed, I watched the door continue its slow journey until it was open about 7 inches. And then I saw it, a hand pale and thin in the night vision footage, fingers wrapped around the edge of the door from the inside. The hand just stayed there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, gripping the door frame like it was testing, waiting, making sure I was truly asleep. Then came the part that made me bite down on my tongue to keep from making any sound. A head emerged from the darkness of the closet, followed by shoulders, and I watched in absolute horror as a person. A grown man wearing what looked like a dark hoodie slowly crawled out of my closet on his hands and knees, moving with the practiced silence of someone who had done this many times before. The intruder stayed crouched by the closet for several minutes, and through the security camera, I could see him watching my bed, his head tilted at an angle like he was listening to my breathing. He was skinny, probably in his 40s based on what I could make out, with scraggly hair that hung past his shoulders and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in weeks. Then he started moving around my room with disturbing familiarity, opening my dresser drawers just enough to peer inside, picking up items from my bedside table and examining them before placing them back precisely where they belonged. He went through my dirty laundry basket in the corner, actually lifted one of my worn shirts to his face, and I had to suppress the urge to jump up and confront him right there. But fear kept me frozen in place, unsure if he might have a weapon or what he'd do if cornered. After about 20 minutes of this nightmare, the man crawled back toward the closet, his movements just as careful and calculated as before. I watched him slide backwards into that dark space, pulling the door most of the way closed behind him, leaving it open just those familiar few inches that I had been waking up to every morning. The realization hit me like ice water. This man had been living in my closet, coming out every night while I slept, going through my things, watching me, and who knows what else. My closet was deeper than standard. I still remembered from the house tour. Something about it extending under the stairs with that strange angular space in the back where I had shoved some old boxes when I settled in. There was enough room back there for someone to hide, especially someone thin and flexible enough to contort themselves into that corner behind my hanging clothes and storage containers. I stayed there until sunrise, unable to move, unable to think clearly, just watching that closet door through both my own eyes and the security camera feed on my phone. When morning light finally crept through the windows, I with care got out of bed, grabbed my car keys and wallet from the dresser, and went directly out of the house in my pajamas and bare feet. I sat behind the wheel in the driveway and called 911, told them everything while watching the main door of my house to make sure he did not try to leave. The cops arrived within 11 minutes, 3 patrol cars with lights strobing, and I gave them my house keys and told them precisely where to look. They went in with weapons drawn, shouting commands. And about 5 minutes later, they walked out with the man in handcuffs, his head down, offering no fight at all, just shuffling along like he was disappointed his secret had been discovered. The investigator who took my statement later explained to me the guy's name was Raymond Kessler, a 49-year-old with a history of breaking and entering trespassing and voyeurism charges going back 13 years. He'd been living in my closet for nearly 3 weeks, surviving on food he'd steal from my kitchen during his nightly excursions. Apparently, he'd been very careful to only take things I would not notice. A handful of crackers here, a bit of lunch meat there, sips from different bottles so the levels would not drop noticeably. They found his makeshift nest in that back corner of the closet, a sleeping bag compressed into a tiny bundle, empty water bottles he'd pee in during the day when I was home, granola bars and a notebook where he'd been writing down my daily routine, when I showered, when I left for grocery runs, when I had online meetings for work. The most disturbing part was a collection of my personal items he'd hoarded back there. A few unwashed coffee mugs I thought I had misplaced, some underwear from my laundry, even my old work ID badge from the job I had quit 7 months ago that I told myself got lost in the move. Leonard had, from what they said, done this before in other houses, the investigator explained, picking homes with single occupants who worked from home, studying their patterns for weeks before making his move. He'd accessed my house through a cellar window I did not even know could open. Had been living in my cellar for days before discovering that perfect hiding spot in my bedroom closet where he could watch me more closely. They charged him with burglary, criminal trespass, and stalking. And he's currently serving a 6-year sentence, though I doubt that's enough to stop him from doing it again when he gets out. I left of that house the next week. Didn't even go back to pack properly. Just hired movers to grab everything while I waited outside. Now I stay in a studio apartment with no closets at all. Just open wardrobes and transparent storage shelves. And I sleep with all the lights on because I have to be able to see every corner of my space at all times. Need to know that I am truly alone when I close my eyes at night. Story 8. The lease paperwork showed my birth date clear as day, June 1990, which meant I had turned 33 just weeks before signing. 33 and finally living alone for the first time in my life, if you can believe that. I had spent years bouncing between roommates, then moved back home after my dad got sick. And by the time he recovered, I was desperate for my own space. The rental on Cedar Hollow Lane was not much. A small 2-bedroom cottage with peeling yellow paint and a chain-link fence. But it was mine. All mine. The landlord, Mr. Bellamy, looked nice enough during the showing. Older guy, possibly in his 60s, with reading glasses that hung on a chain around his neck and a habit of jingling his keys while he talked. He explained to me he owned 4 properties in the area, all single-family homes he rented out to nice, quiet folks. I signed the lease that same afternoon, handed over first and last month's rent, and got my keys on a worn brass ring with a little blue tag that said Unit C, even though there was no Unit A or B anywhere in sight. The strangeness started small, the kind of thing you talk yourself out of noticing. I had come home from my job at the veterinary clinic. I am a vet. Been doing it for about 9 years now, and the kitchen light would be on. Not a big deal, right? Maybe I had left it on that morning in my rush to get out the door. But then it happened again and again. Always the kitchen light, that ugly fluorescent fixture that vibrated like an angry wasp. I began making a point to check before I left. Even took a photo on my phone one morning to prove to myself I had turned it off. When I came home that evening, it was blazing bright again. Then I noticed the deadbolt. I am obsessive about locking up. Always have been ever since my apartment got broken into back in college. So, I know for a fact I turned that deadbolt until it clicks. But I had put my key in the lock and feel it turn just a fraction before catching like someone had left it not quite locked. Just slightly turned back, possibly a quarter inch from fully engaged. It made this strange grinding sound, metal on metal, that set my teeth on edge every single time. I phoned Mr. Bellamy on a Wednesday morning, trying to keep my voice casual, even though my heart was doing this annoying flutter thing in my chest. Hey, just wondering, has anyone been coming by the house, like for inspections or anything? There was a pause, then that jingling sound of his keys in the background. Oh, sure, he said like it was the most normal thing in the world. That's just Caleb, my maintenance guy. He checks the furnace filters, looks for leaks, that sort of thing. Standard stuff. I should have mentioned it in the lease. My apologies. He laughed. This wheezy sound that crackled through the phone. Caleb's been working for me for 12 years. Good guy. Very thorough. He has keys to all my properties. Something about the way he said very thorough turned my stomach feel strange. But I thanked him and hung up. It made sense. I guess landlords did that kind of thing. Still, I wished he'd given me a heads up, possibly a schedule of when this Caleb guy was coming by. But the lights kept happening, and not just the kitchen anymore. I would wake up at 2:10 in the morning to use the washroom and see a glow coming from under my bedroom door, the corridor light blazing bright. I stayed alone. I knew I hadn't gotten up and turned it on. One night, I found the lamp in the front room on the one by the bookshelf that I never used because it had this ancient bulb that flickered and gave me a headache. It was on when I came home from a late shift, throwing these strange shadows across the wall that looked almost like someone standing there. I checked each window, every door. Nothing looked forced or broken. Everything locked up tight from the inside. I began keeping a log on my phone, just noting down every time something was off. May 9th, kitchen light on, deadbolt loose. May 12th, corridor light on at 2:10 a.m. May 17th, front room lamp on, rear door lock. Felt strange. I did not know what I was going to do with this information, but it made me feel slightly less insane to have it written down somewhere. Then things got worse in a way that's hard to explain without sounding paranoid. Objects started moving. Not dramatically. I am not talking about chairs stacked on tables or anything like that, but small things. My coffee mug, the blue one with the chipped handle that I always left on the right side of the sink, would be on the left. The throw pillows on my couch, which I arranged the same way every day. 2 on the left, 1 on the right. Don't ask me why, it's just what I do, would be rearranged. 2 on the right, 1 on the left. The washroom door, which I continued closed because the mirror inside faced my bedroom and it creeped me out at night, would be standing wide open. I had closed it before bed, and by morning it was open again. My toothbrush moved from one side of the sink to the other. A framed photo of my dog, Daisy, she died 3 years ago, still miss her like crazy, continued getting turned face down on my bedside table. That one truly got to me. I had stand it back up, and the next day it would be face down again like someone was intentionally trying to mess with me. I phoned Mr. Bellamy again. This time not even trying to hide the edge in my voice. I need Caleb's schedule, I told him. I need to know precisely when he's coming by because things are being settled in my house, and it's freaking me out. Another pause. More key jingling. Moved? What do you mean moved? He sounded genuinely confused, which somehow made it worse. I explained about the lights, the locks, the objects. He made this sympathetic humming noise. Honey, old houses settle. Doors swing open on their own. You probably just forgot where you put things. Happens to me all the time. I wanted to scream that I was not some scattered airhead who could not remember where she put her own coffee mug. But instead, I just asked again about Caleb's schedule. He doesn't truly have one, Mr. Bellamy said. He just swings by when he's in the area. Could be morning, could be afternoon. I will tell him to possibly leave you a note next time. How's that? It was not what I wanted to hear, but I did not know what else to say, so I just agreed and hung up. That night, I hardly slept. Every creak of the house settling made me sit up in bed, staring at my bedroom door, waiting for the handle to turn. The point where I cracked came on a Friday night in mid-June. I had worked a double shift at the clinic. We'd had an emergency surgery on a Great Dane who'd eaten a bunch of socks. Real mess. And I was absolutely exhausted. The kind of tired where your bones ache and your eyes feel like sandpaper. I came home around 11:20, threw my scrubs in the hamper, took the quickest shower of my life, and fell into bed without even checking my phone. I was asleep within minutes. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Not suddenly, not from a noise, just that strange sense that something was different, that the air pressure in the room had changed somehow. My eyes opened, and I lay there in the dark, perfectly still, listening. The house was silent, not even the hum of the refrigerator or the tick of the heating vent. Just pure, heavy silence that felt like it was pressing down on my chest. And then I heard it, the softest sound hardly there. Breathing. Not my breathing. Someone else's breathing. Slow and steady, coming from somewhere near the foot of my bed. My entire body went rigid. I did not move. Didn't even blink. I just lay there straining my ears, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But I was not. The breathing continued, patient and unhurried, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. I don't know how long I lay there. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 5 minutes. Time did this strange, stretchy thing where every heartbeat felt like an hour. The breathing eventually stopped, and I heard the faintest whisper of movement, like fabric brushing against fabric. Footsteps so quiet I almost missed them, moving away from my bed toward the door. The click of my bedroom door closing so gentle it hardly made a sound. Then nothing at all. I waited another 10 minutes before I dared to move, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I thought I might pass out. When I finally reached over and turned on my side of the bed lamp, my hands were trembling so badly I almost knocked it over. The room was empty, door closed, everything precisely as it should be. But on my dresser, the little jewelry box I continued there, my grandmother's antique one with the painted roses, was open. I never left it open, ever. Inside, my necklaces were tangled together in a way they hadn't been before, like someone had been running their fingers through them. I picked up my phone and sat with my back against the headboard until the sun came up. Lights blazing in every room, checking the lock on my bedroom door every few minutes, even though I knew it did not have one. The next morning, I did not call Mr. Bellamy. I did not trust him anymore. Didn't trust his excuses about Caleb or settling houses or my own faulty memory. Instead, I drove to a Best Buy 30 minutes away and bought a hidden security camera. One of those little wireless ones that looks like a phone charger and connects to an app on your phone. Cost me almost $200. Money I truly did not have, but I did not care. I needed to know. I set it up on my dresser that afternoon, angling it toward my bedroom door so it would catch anyone coming in. The app would send me a notification if it detected motion, and it recorded everything to a cloud server. I tested it a few times, walking in and out of frame, watching the footage on my phone. Perfect. Crystal clear, even in low light. That night, I went through my normal routine. Dinner, shower, double CH, checked every lock in the house. But instead of going to bed, I took 2 Benadryl to knock myself out. I know that sounds stupid, making myself unconscious when I was scared someone might come in. But I needed them to think everything was normal. I needed them to show up, and I needed proof. The notification woke me up at 1:38 a.m. My phone vibrated on the bedside table, the screen lighting up with the alert. Motion detected in bedroom. My pulse started racing immediately. That horrible adrenaline dump that makes your whole body feel electric. I opened the app with shaking fingers. Okay, my hands were shaking. I will admit that. And watched the live feed. The angle showed my bedroom door. And as I watched, the handle turned slowly with care, like someone was trying not to make noise. The door opened, and a figure stepped inside. The video quality was good enough that I could see details even in the darkness. It was a man average height, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. But here's the thing that made my throat tighten. It was not some stranger. It was Mr. Bellamy, my landlord. The same guy who'd been telling me it was just Caleb, the maintenance man. He stood in my doorway for a few seconds, fully still, just looking into my room. Then he stepped further inside, moving with this careful precision that explained to me he'd done this before, many times before. He walked to the side of my bed, my side, the left side where I was currently pretending to be asleep, and just stood there watching me. I could see him on my phone screen, this dark silhouette looming over where I lay, and I had to bite my lip to keep from making a sound. He stood there for what the timestamp later showed was 4 minutes and 12 seconds. 4.5 minutes of him just standing beside my bed, staring down at me while I pretended to sleep. At one point, he leaned down slightly, and I swear I could feel the displacement of air near my face. My eyes were squeezed shut under the blanket, my breathing measured and slow, even though my heart was trying to pound its way out of my chest. Through my phone screen, which I had tilted just enough to see while keeping it hidden under my pillow, I watched him reach out. His hand hovered over my hair, which was spread across the pillow, and for a horrible second, I thought he was going to touch me, but he pulled back. He straightened up, turned slowly, and walked to my dresser, the jewelry box. He opened it, that same painted rose box, and I watched him sift through the necklaces, picking up a silver chain my mom had given me for my 21st birthday, and holding it up to what little light came through the window. Then he put it back, closed the box, and moved to my closet. He opened the door, which I always continued closed, and just stood there looking at my clothes for another minute. The whole time his movements were casual, unhurried, like he was browsing a store, like he had every right to be there. Finally, he walked back to the door, paused to look at me one more time, and left. I heard the soft click of the main door lock engaging a minute later. I waited until I saw his car pull away. I jumped up and looked out the window, watched his old Buick sedan disappear down Cedar Hollow Lane before I let myself fall apart. I sat on my washroom floor and cried for 20 minutes straight. That ugly kind of crying where you can't catch your breath and your whole face gets splotchy. But then I stopped. I washed my face, drank a glass of water, and got angry. Really, truly angry. That footage was saved to the cloud. I had him clear as day, breaking into my house, standing over me while I slept. I downloaded the video file, backed it up in 3 different places, and at 8 a.m. sharp, I walked into the police station 2 blocks from the clinic. The patrol officer who took my report, Patrol Officer Patel, a young woman who could not have been more than a few years out of the academy, went pale when I showed her the footage. "Jesus Christ," she muttered, watching Mr. Bellamy loom over my bed. "How many times do you think he's done this?" I showed her my log of all the lights and moved objects going back to early May. "At least 18 times," I said, maybe more before I began keeping track. They arrested him that afternoon. It turned out I was not the first tenant to complain about strange things happening, but I was the first one with proof. When they searched his house, they found keys to all his rental properties labeled and organized in a drawer. They also found photos, Polaroids of women sleeping, different women, different rooms, but each one showing the same awful violation. The prosecutor explained to me later there were pictures stretching back for at least 10 years. Story 9. Late January in Montana gets brutal. But that afternoon when I walked through the Victorian on Ellis Court, sunlight was streaming through those huge bay windows like the universe was trying to tell me something. My realtor, Nora, this woman with hot pink nails who wore way too much perfume, kept checking her phone and rushing me through the tour, mentioning 3 other couples were coming to see it that same day. I was 32, had just finalized my divorce documents the week before, and desperately needed somewhere that did not remind me of my former husband's cologne or his stupid baseball trophies. Original hardwood floors creaked under my feet as I explored each room, and that wraparound porch sealed the deal for me. What Nora did not mention, what I had to find out later from the postal carrier, was that the previous owners had packed up in the middle of the night 3 months earlier, leaving half their furniture behind. The rental company had cleaned everything out, painted over whatever needed painting. But nobody in the neighborhood looked to want to talk about why the Whitakers left so suddenly. Moving day came 2 weeks later, and I threw myself into making that house mine with an energy I hadn't felt in years. The guest bedroom became my office, painted this soft sage green that reminded me of my grandmother's breakfast nook where I used to do homework as a kid. Cooper, my yellow lab mix, who usually acted like the world was ending every time a leaf blew past, actually began to calm down in the new space, stretching out on the kitchen tiles while I worked. Being a medical transcriptionist meant I could work from anywhere with decent internet, and the quiet neighborhood looked ideal for concentration. My new neighbors waved from their driveways but kept their distance. Suburban courtesy that suited me fine after months of friends trying to set me up with their cousins or coworkers. The street had this predictable rhythm that felt comforting. School bus at 7:25 sharp, mail delivery around 2:10, porch lights clicking on at dusk. For the first time since my marriage imploded, I could breathe without feeling like my chest might cave in. Everything changed on a Wednesday night, precisely 3 weeks after I had settled in. The digital clock on my bedside table glowed 3:16 a.m. when I woke up to Cooper growling. This low rumble, I had never heard from him before. He was standing at the foot of my bed, rigid, staring toward the corridor that led to the back of the house. Then I heard it. 3 slow, intentional knocks on the rear door. Not frantic pounding like someone in trouble. Not the quick rap of a drunk person at the wrong house. These knocks had a rhythm to them, almost ceremonial. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. Each one looked to echo through the house longer than it should have. Cooper's growl turned into a whine, and he backed up until he was pressed against my legs. I lay there hardly breathing, telling myself it was just tree branches or possibly a raccoon, even though I knew damn well neither of those things knock in perfect intervals. The knocking stopped after possibly 30 seconds, but I could not go back to sleep. I spent the rest of the night sitting up in bed with every light in my bedroom on, Cooper curled up beside me, both of us jumping at every creak the old house made. When morning finally came, I checked the rear door. Nothing disturbed. No footprints in the flower bed below the porch. No explanation for what we'd heard. I even asked my neighbor Elliot, this retired mechanic who looked to know everything about everyone on the street, if he'd heard anything strange during the night. He just looked at me for a long moment, then muttered something about possums getting bold this time of year before hurrying back inside. The way he avoided eye contact made my skin crawl. That night, I double-checked all the locks, left the porch lights on, and went to bed, hoping it was just a one-time thing, some teenager playing a prank or something equally innocent. 2 nights passed without incident, and I had almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. Then Friday hit, and at 3:06 a.m. the knocking returned. This time, it started at the rear door. Same slow, measured pattern, but after 3 knocks it stopped. The silence stretched out for possibly 10 seconds. And just as I was starting to relax, 3 knocks came from the side of the house, right outside the dining room window. Cooper went absolutely ballistic, barking and snarling like I had never seen. But he would not leave my bedroom. Wouldn't go investigate. I picked up my phone, fingers fumbling as I tried to dial 911. But then the knocking moved again. 3 knocks at the main door, then silence, then 3 more knocks from the other side of the house near the kitchen. Whatever was out there was circling my house, knocking at different points like it was testing something, mapping the layout, learning the space. The pattern continued for almost 10 minutes. Back door, east side, main door, west side, over and over before everything went quiet. I did call the cops that time, my voice shaky as I tried to explain what happened without sounding fully unhinged. 2 patrol officers showed up about 20 minutes later, did a perfunctory check around the property with their flashlights, and explained to me they did not see anything suspicious. The younger one, Patrol Officer Mason, looked genuinely concerned and said they'd have patrol cars swinging by more often. The older cop, though, continued exchanging these looks with his partner like they knew something I did not. Before they left, Mason pulled me aside and asked if I had considered getting security cameras. Said it real quiet, like he did not want his partner to hear. The way he said it, urgent but careful, made me realize this was not the first time they'd been called to this street for something like this. That weekend, I drove 40 minutes to the nearest electronics store and bought 4 security cameras, the best ones I could afford, determined to catch whatever sick person was doing this. Installing those security cameras gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since the knocking started. My brother-in-law, Frank, came over Sunday afternoon to help set them up. One covering the rear door, one on each side of the house, and one watching the front porch. The system connected to my phone so I could check the feeds anytime, and it would send alerts for any motion between midnight and 6 a.m. Frank, bless him, did not ask too many questions, just made sure everything was working and showed me how to save footage to the cloud. That first night with the security cameras, I actually managed to sleep a few hours feeling like I finally had some armor against whatever was happening. Monday passed peacefully, then Tuesday, and I began to think possibly whoever it was had seen the security cameras and decided to find an easier target. I should have known better. Predators don't just give up when you make things slightly harder for them. They adapt. They wait. They find new ways to get what they want. Thursday morning, 3:12 a.m. My phone lit up with movement alerts. I picked up it with trembling fingers, pulled up the live feed, and there he was, a man in a dark hoodie. The hood pulled so far forward I could not see any features, just darkness where a face should be. He was not at the rear door this time. The security camera showed him standing in my backyard, possibly 18 feet from the house, perfectly still, facing the rear door. He stood there for precisely 3 milestones. I know because I could not look away, could not even blink. Then he raised his right hand and knocked 3 times in the air like he was knocking on an invisible door. The motion was slow, intentional, precisely matching the rhythm I had been hearing. Then he turned and walked to the east side of the house, disappearing from that security camera's view. The side security camera picked him up, showed him standing there, making the same knocking motion in the air. He continued this pattern, circling my house, stopping at each point where he'd knocked before, but never actually approaching the doors or windows, never touching anything, just standing at a distance, going through the motions, like he was rehearsing something or performing some kind of ritual. I phoned 911 while watching him circle my house for the 3rd time, my voice high and panicked as I tried to explain what was happening. The dispatcher continued asking if he was trying to break in, if he had any weapons visible, and I continued saying, "No, he's just standing there knocking on nothing at all. Please just send someone." By the time the cops arrived 14 minutes later, the longest 14 minutes of my life, he was gone. Vanished between one security camera angle and the next, like he knew precisely where the blind spots were. Patrol Officer Mason showed up again, this time with an investigator named Fisher, who took everything much more seriously. They reviewed all the footage on my phone, copied the files, took down every detail I could remember. Investigator Fisher continued pausing the video, zooming in, trying to get any identifying features, but the hood and the darkness made it impossible. She asked me if I recognized the build, the walk, anything about him. But all I could see was that intentional, measured way he moved, like someone who had all the time in the world and knew precisely what he was doing. Investigator Fisher pulled me aside while Mason checked the perimeter again and explained to me straight up that this behavior was escalating. She said, the pattern, the testing, the circling, the way he never approached from the same angle twice, said someone who was studying my routines, learning when I was most vulnerable. She'd seen similar cases, she said, though she was careful not to give too many details. The way her jaw tightened when she talked about it explained to me enough. She gave me her direct number, explained to me to call immediately if anything else happened, and said I might want to stay with friends or family for a while. But where was I supposed to go? My parents lived 3 states away. My sister had a new baby and no room, and I had just spent everything I had on this house. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the bedroom door, continued all the lights on, and sat up with Cooper, refreshing the security camera feeds every few minutes, waiting for him to come back, because somehow I knew he would. People like that don't just stop. They escalate, just like the investigator said. 3 nights later, he did not come to my house. The movement alerts that woke me at 3:21 a.m. were not from my security cameras. They were from the app glitching, showing me static where the feeds should have been. I picked up my phone to call Investigator Fisher, but before I could dial, I heard sirens, lots of them, converging somewhere close. Cooper was pacing, whining, but not at my doors or windows. He continued looking toward the front of the house, toward the street. I crept to my front window, peered through the curtains, and saw patrol officers' cars, ambulances, the whole circus 3 houses down at the Harper's place, the elderly couple who'd always waved when they walked their ancient beagle. My phone rang, Investigator Fisher, and her voice was tight, professional, asking if I was okay, if my doors were locked, if I had seen anything. She could not give me details, she said, but they needed my security camera footage from the past week. All of it immediately. The way she said it, I knew the Harpers were not okay. I knew that whoever had been circling my house, learning my patterns, had moved on to an easier target when I had made myself too difficult. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I had basically pushed him toward my neighbors by installing those security cameras, by being vigilant, by not being the easy victim he'd wanted. Investigator Fisher called me 2 days later with an update I will never forget. They'd caught him, not at the Harper's house, but at another home 6 blocks away. Caught in the act of trying to break in through a cellar window at 3:05 a.m. The homeowner, a nurse who worked night shifts, had come home unexpectedly and called 911 when she saw him. His name was Darren Pike, 6 years old, lived alone in an apartment complex 3 miles away. When they searched his place, they found notebooks, dozens of them, filled with detailed observations about houses in our neighborhood, sketches of layouts, notes about routines, which houses had dogs, which had security systems when people left for work. My house had 16 pages dedicated to it. The Fosters, the family who'd lived there before me, had 12 pages, ending with a note that said, "Moved away," and the date they'd left. The investigator said he'd been doing this for at least 2 years, possibly longer. 7 home invasions they could definitively link to him, all following the same pattern. The knocking, the circling, the studying, then striking when he'd learned enough. The Harpers had survived hardly, hidden in their washroom while he ransacked their house. Investigator Fisher said, "My security cameras probably saved my life, that he'd clearly decided I was too risky after seeing himself on video. Darren Pike is serving 28 years to life now, but I still wake up sometimes at 3:05 a.m., and I still inspect those security cameras because even though I know he's locked up, I can't shake the memory of watching him knock on invisible doors practicing for the real thing."